Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you guys are new. Today's video is going to be my palette ranking based on how many times I've actually used my palettes. And these are going to be how many times I've used them during the first quarter of this year. So last year I did this video in June or July, and then at the very end of the year, and I did the entire year to let you know which one I had used the most. This year I think I'm going to end up doing kind of 5 parts of this video, so I'll do one for each quarter. And in that video will just be that quarter. So like in quarter 2, I'm not going to mention the numbers from quarter 1. And then at the very end of the year, probably actually in January of next year, right in the beginning of the year, I will tell you guys overall the entire year how many times did I use the palettes. I really love these videos. This is a way I can share them a little bit more frequently, but still be able to tell you at the end of the year how many times I use them as a whole. So I like to start out with my singles because it doesn't feel right to put this in the ranking because they're just from multiple different palettes or they were sold as singles. So my singles are kept in 3 different palettes right now. I have one kind of catch-all palette that has a little bit of everything. So I actually depotted these shades from an Ulta Beauty like free with purchase sort of palette. I actually ended up depotting my REM Beauty Midnight Snack palette. So I'll mention that when I get to that palette in the ranking. And then I just have some other random singles in here. And then I also have this duo from Give Me Glow. So these are in the shades Perry and Wink. And then I also have my favorite 4 singles in this little ColourPop. This was a blush. And I just kind of fixed up the packaging so I could fit 4 shadows in this. And these shadows are all from the ColourPop and Kathleen Light's So Jaded palette. So anytime that I reached into any of these singles, I just counted them as a singles. Oh, and I also have some like single package singles, like eyeshadow toppers or liquid shadows or something like that. So it just is a lot. So I count them all together. So for the singles, I use them 14 times in quarter 1. But like I said, that just doesn't really count in my ranking system. So I like to mention them ahead of time. Okay, so I'm going to start in spot number 10. There's a lot of ties in these numbers. I have a lot more than 10 palettes. So in spot number 10, these are actually the palettes that I have not used yet this year. So I'm actually really surprised with this first one. This is the Pillow Talk Quad from Charlotte Tilbury. I used this one so much at the end of last year that I guess I just didn't reach for it in the beginning of this year. And when I was looking through and totaling all these up, I really couldn't believe that I had not used this at all. I might have dipped into it for like one shade and then forgotten to write it down or something. I'm not really good at writing down every palette if I only reach into one shade, but I've been trying to be better about that because I am still using the palette, but I haven't used this that I've recorded, so I really don't think I've used it this year so far, which is just crazy because I used it so much in November and December last year. Another one that I have not used yet this year is this one from Natasha Denona. This is the Ayana palette. It's like a little 5-pan palette, but it's not like one of their mini ones. This came in like a BoxyCharm, I think, but I did actually win this particular palette in a giveaway, so I did not purchase it, but I think typically people are getting them in BoxyCharms. I actually really like this palette. I'm surprised I haven't used it, but I have not used that yet this year. This one I actually have used this year, but I used it in April, so it didn't count for this ranking, but this is the Nomad America's Parks palette. This is just not a palette I typically use in the colder months, so I did actually use this last weekend to create a look. So you guys actually saw that in one of my recent videos. You saw me wearing this palette. So for now it's 0 because of quarter 1, but I have actually dipped into this. This one is another one I haven't used in quarter 1. This is the Beauty Bakery Do It for the Gram eyeshadow palette. My friend Diana sent me this. If you guys missed that video, I had a video titled My Friend Sent Me Friend Mail or something like that. And I was unboxing it and then trying some things out, but I actually ended up using a different palette in that video, so I hadn't used this one yet, and I'm excited to try it out. I've swatched it, but I still haven't tried it on the eyes, so I am really excited for that. There's a new palette that I got in my collection, and I've just been using it a lot, so I haven't dipped into this one yet. This one I'm surprised I haven't reached into more. This is the ColourPop That's Taupe palette. I usually do use this in the winter time, but I guess because I've just been a little bit more into warm tone shadows, I just haven't used this one as much. So I haven't reached for it yet this year, but I really need to do that because it's such a good palette. And then another one I haven't reached for this year is the Juvia's Place The Magic Mini. I'm kind of surprised I haven't reached for this one, but I say this a lot. I just feel like I love the color story of this, and there's so many shades that I really like, but the matte shades just don't really ground the palette for me. I feel like I'm always having to reach into something else, and so I don't think to reach for this palette sometimes. This might be one that I honestly need to depot and put in my singles collection. I wonder if I would use it more that way, but I don't know. I don't know that I'm ready to do that right now. So for now, I'm gonna leave it like this, but hopefully I will reach for this one more over the rest of the year. But these are all the palettes that I did not use at all in quarter 1 of the year. So in spot number 9 are the palettes that I used one time in quarter 1, and there are a lot of them. So I'm just gonna kind of fly through them. I feel like once we get to like the higher numbers, it'll be a little bit more exciting. But the first palette that I used once in quarter 1 is the Warrior palette by Juvia's Place. This is one that I always mention, like I can't ever decide if I want to keep it or get rid of it because I just don't feel like I reach for it enough. But I'm always drawn back to it because it reminds me of the Natasha Denona bronze palette, which I'm consistently putting in my Sephora's love list and then taking it out and putting it back in. So I kind of make myself keep this one because of that. So when I want to buy the Natasha Denona one, I try to reach for this one instead, even though it's just a little bit different. But I've only used it once so far. The next one is the Nomad Iceland palette. I've only dipped into this one time so far this year. I'm not really surprised by this because I've just been more into neutral looks lately, even warm tone leaning, but really just neutral. And I just don't really wear a lot of colorful ones anymore right now. I don't know. I've been getting a little bit more into it. Another kind of colorful palette that's just very warm tone. This is the Nomad Cartagena palette, and I really like this one. I'm actually wearing this today. I've got several palettes on the eyes. I'll try to mention the other 2 palettes that I used when I get to them. If not, I'll go ahead and list the 3 that I used in the description box. But I did dip into this one for today's look, and this shimmer shade here is on the inner portion of my lid. But I really like this one. I'm so glad I picked this up. I mentioned before, but I kind of just threw it into my cart with another Nomad purchase, and I'm really glad it ended up being my favorite one from that whole order. Another palette that I only used once in quarter 1 is the Profusion Harvest palette. This is a favorite palette of mine, but I tend to use it in the fall a lot more, so I didn't really use it too much in the beginning of the year, which I think makes sense, but I still really love this palette. I can't believe it was only $10. It's such a good price. This next one is my Lethal Custom palette. I have just been a little bit underwhelmed by this palette, and I feel like I forget to reach for it, especially because I have a lot of new favorites, like new palettes to my collection that have become favorites, and so I just feel like I haven't been reaching for this one. I don't know. I really thought I was going to love it, so it's a little bit of a bummer because it was so expensive, but oh well. Hopefully I will use it more throughout the rest of the year. The next one is the Revolution or I Heart Revolution Mini Tasty Avocado palette. This is such a good palette. I really love this one. I created a green look that I had on camera for maybe 1 or 2 videos on my channel. I can't remember, but you guys seem to really like that look, and this is the palette that I used to create it. I think it's such a good palette. I really just love this in my collection. This one I'm really surprised about too. This is the ColourPop Making Mauves palette. I can't believe I only used this once in quarter 1. This is actually currently in my Shop My Stash, so I have used it more now, but we're in April now, so it doesn't count for quarter 1. But I just love how loved this palette looks. It has so much usage in it, and I would love to hit some more pans. I've been really trying to focus on this shimmer shade here as well as this other light matte shade. So hopefully I can hit some more pans in it this year, but this is such a favorite palette from ColourPop, and I really love the packaging too. So pretty. This palette from Profusion is the one that I used in the video where I tried some makeup that my friend Diana sent me. This is the Profusion Butterfly palette. Is that actually what it's called? That's what I wrote it down as. It's actually called the Free Spirit palette, but I just kind of refer to it as the Butterfly palette. This one is nice. It's very light though, so if your skin is really any deeper than mine, I just don't think that you would like this one. It took a lot of building, which I didn't mind for the type of look I was creating, but I just wanted to note that it's a little bit chalky, and in comparison to the Profusion Harvest palette I just mentioned, this one really doesn't stand up to that quality, but the Harvest one has really great quality. 2 more palettes that I used one time in quarter 1. This one from Sydney Grace is the newest palette to my collection. This is the Unbreakable Bonds palette, or the Unbreakable Bond palette. And I got this on the last day of March. So I used it once on the last day of March and then I kept using it. But for the quarter one ranking, this was only used one time. This is the palette I was talking about where I said when I got new palettes in my collection, I haven't reached for some other ones like the Profusion palettes that are new to my collection or the Beauty Bakery one. But this is so good. I really enjoyed using it. I used it for about a week straight when I first got it. And it's really good. I'm so glad I finally tried Sydney Grace's formula. And then the last palette that I used just one time, this is the Profusion Metachrome palette. I also dipped into this a little bit in that video, but I actually only used the shade in the middle. Like I said, I've been trying to get better about still putting this on the list or the calendar of what I used that day because I did dip into it. So I think it should still count. So this was the last palette that I only used once in quarter one. Next up, there are 4 palettes that I used twice in quarter one. So these are in the ranking spot of number 8. The first one is the Natasha Denona Glam palette. I am so surprised I did not use this one more. I tend to lean for cool tone shadows in the colder months of the year, but as I've already said about 3 times in this video, I've just been a lot more into warm tone shadows and also some of my newer shadows. So I still love this palette. I have no plans of decluttering this one or anything, but I just haven't used it as much as I probably would have in other years. So this one I only used twice. I also only used this one twice. This is the Huda New Nude palette. I still really love this palette. I actually used it yesterday and I think it's just amazing. Especially these 2 shadows right here I think are just so special. The shades Crave and Daydream. They're so pretty and dimensional. I love that they have different little flecks of glitter in them, especially the shade Crave. But all in all, I just love this palette. I love the tones of the matte shades and the shimmer shades just go so perfectly with them. I really love them. I don't really use the 2 pressed glitters, but it has 18 shades in it, so I honestly just don't really mind that I don't use 2 of the shades. I think that that's still a pretty good ratio of shadows that I do use in the palette. I also only used this palette twice in quarter one. This is the Give Me Glow Cosmetics Pastel Dreams palette. You guys know this is such a favorite, but I tend to use this more in the springtime, and we just got out of winter, so I think it makes sense why I only used it twice, but I still think this is such a great palette. I would love to hit pan in this Lavender Sky shade. Look how big the dip in that shade is. I would just love to hit pan in it, but I just don't even know how big the pans are because this is my only Give Me Glow palette and I've never hit pan in any of the shades. So if you guys have this palette or any of the other palettes or shadows from Give Me Glow and you've hit pan in it, please can you let me know how deep is the pan? Am I actually close to hitting pan in this, or is this a joke and I'm nowhere near? Let me know if you guys already know. The last palette that I used twice in quarter one is this one from Profusion as well. This is from the same collection as the Harvest palette, but this is the Ethereal palette. So I'm actually going to depot this palette probably later today, if not maybe, sometime this week. But I recently depotted a couple of my palettes and it really made me realize that I just need to depot this one. I've mentioned several times that I feel like I'm keeping this palette for this one shade right here. And while I don't want to just take that one shade out and then give this palette to someone with a missing shadow, because I've depotted other palettes, I've actually been putting shadows into this other empty palette that I don't really want to keep. I actually have some more I need to put in this one, but I'm planning to just kind of put all of these shadows into here and then give them to someone. I got this idea from Sarah Rose. I will link her video below where she depotted a palette. She just really inspired me to do that because she was doing that where she was putting the shades she didn't want into a palette to then give to someone. I thought that was a really good idea, and I have several of these palettes, so I think I'm kind of okay with getting rid of one or passing one along to someone else. So that's what I'm planning to do. I will likely put kind of all of the shadows in this palette to give to someone to enjoy, and it will likely still have room in it for them to grow a singles collection if they want to. So that's kind of my plan. I'm going to really swatch all of these shades and see if there's any other ones that I want to keep. Maybe the shade Delicate. I also really like this one, but I think I have similar shades to most of these in my Huda Mercury Retrograde palette. You guys pointed out after I purchased this one that it was kind of a dupe for that palette, which I already own. So ever since then, if I want a look from this palette, I tend to just reach for the Mercury Retrograde one. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna end up keeping the shade Florence or Fluorescence and then pass the rest of the shades on. But I did use this twice as a palette in Q1. Okay, in spot number 7 are the palettes that I used 3 times. The first one is the Huda Nude Light palette. I actually feel like I didn't even use this 3 times, so I'm surprised that I did. I'm guessing I reached for this on like a couple weekdays or something, I don't remember. But I really love this palette. I have pan in every single shade. This is such a favorite of mine and it has been for so long. This was one of the first palettes that I really loved every shade in. It's not that hard to do that with a 9-pin palette, I feel like, or at least it's a little bit easier than like an 18-pin palette or something to like and use every single shade. But between this one and my Juvia's Place The Deuce palette, they really like set the standard for other palettes that I was purchasing because I love all of the shades in both of those palettes. And so I started to think about that when I was looking to purchase another one. Like I really want to like all the shades in the palettes. So that one is just so good. I really love it. Eventually that one will go to my makeup memory box because I don't think I can ever like actually get rid of it. Speaking of the makeup memory box, this palette is also in that box. This is a new one, but I've used this palette, which is the Huda Mercury Retrograde palette, 3 times as well, and it's still just so good. I really want to use this more this spring. This is the palette that the ethereal one was kind of duping, but I love this one. Some of these shadows, again, are just so stunning. I actually really like, I think it's, actually both of these gold shades are really, really pretty as well. This one is a favorite. I love this palette so much. I think it's just so good. Huda just makes some of the best shadows. She actually discontinued this palette, so that's such a bummer, but I am really glad that I repurchased it because my old one was really used, but it was just getting a little bit older and I wanted to have a new one in my collection so that I can use it even longer. So I've used that one 3 times so far. Next up is the Natasha Denona My Dream palette. I actually did use some of this one today as well. So I used all of the more like warm tone matte shades, and then this shade here called Invention is what you're seeing on the outside of my lid. And then I also used, I used this one a lot on the outer corner. And then the lighter 2 shades in my crease mixed in with another one that I'll show you in a minute. I really love this palette though. I think that it just really surprised me. I did receive this one in PR from the brand, but I would not have purchased this. I wouldn't have purchased this palette because I wasn't like that drawn to it, drawn enough to buy it. But I'm so glad that I have it, and if I lost it, I would repurchase it. So I would suggest repurchasing it or purchasing it, but I'm glad that I received it because otherwise I don't think I would have it in my collection. The last palette that I used 3 times in the first quarter is this one from Essence. This is the Coral Me Maybe palette. I go back and forth on this one as well. I don't know. Sometimes I really like it, other times not so much, but I do feel like it's a really good kind of like summertime palette for me. I feel like these warm tones just really make my green eyes stand out, so I really do like that, but I did use that 3 times as well. So all of the 4 palettes here are in spot number 7. Moving on to spot number 6, these are the palettes that I used 4 times. There's just 2 of them. The first one is the Deuce by Juvia's Place. This is the other one I was mentioning where I like every single shade in this palette. I think that it's just so pretty. This one unfortunately has also been discontinued, but I just still love it. I actually bought mine off of Poshmark pretty soon after it got discontinued, and I've been loving it ever since. So it's a little old, but I still just really enjoy it. And then the other palette in this spot is the BH Hangin' in Hawaii palette. I really like this one. I'm so glad I finally picked up a BH Cosmetics palette. Their formula is seriously just like next level. I honestly feel like the shimmers in this palette are as good or even better than Natasha Denona shimmers. Yeah, and I really like Natasha Denona shimmers. The matte shades are very blendable. They're mostly medium toned shadows, so I feel like they work for really any skin tone because if you have deeper skin, you can build them up or just use them as a crease shade. Whereas for me, I do have to use a pretty light hand for this, but I still really enjoy this palette, especially the shimmer shades, but the mattes perform really well also. So those are the 2 palettes in spot number 6. Spot number 5 is this palette from Moira Cosmetics. This is the Chasing Eternity palette. I did win this in a giveaway from the company, but I've used this 5 times so far, or I used this 5 times in Q1 of the year, and this is just such a favorite. I mention this all the time. The shade right here is my favorite, called Eternity. it's just great. I don't like that the packaging is so bulky, but I don't even care. I can look past it. Spot number 4 is the Kathleen Lights and Il Makiage Disco Fox palette. This one I used 6 times. I don't know, like if I if I could go back, I'd probably not pick this palette up, just to be honest, but I still really like it. I just, like, it frustrates me. I mention this all the time. It frustrates me that there's like a handle on this side of the palette because I'm left-handed, and so I hold a palette with my right hand and then like dip into it with my left hand. So I'm trying to hold it, and this is just like extra weight. Whereas if I was right-handed, you can hold on to this, and it just bothers me. Like, Kathleen Lights is also left-handed, so like you think that she would want that on the right side. Also, I know that in her video she said like, oh, I'm gonna post so many videos with this, and then I feel like she didn't. So that's just kind of frustrating. I don't know. I've purchased so many of Kathleen's collabs, and I think this will be the last one that I purchase, unless the next one is something that I just like have to have, but I'm no longer going to buy collabs just because they're Kathleen's. Yeah. Some of her, like, her collabs in the past have been my favorites though, like the Zodiac palette, the Dream Street palette, even the So Jaded. I still love those 4 shades from it. So I do think that she comes out with really good products, but this one just kind of didn't hit the mark for me entirely. And it's just not my favorite palette in my collection. I still use it, obviously. It's in spot number 4 for a reason, but I just feel like I didn't really need this one. So I don't know. If you didn't buy it, then congrats, you saved some money. But yeah, that one's in spot number 4. And spot number 3 is another tie. The first palette in the tie is the BH and Iggy Azalea Totally Plastic palette. I have the pink version. So I used this 7 times in the first quarter of the year. I've mentioned this one too. I actually love every shadow in this palette as well. So this kind of fits into that category too. But I really love this one. I don't think the color story at first seems like, not that it's not cohesive, because it has this random yellow, but the random yellow actually makes a lot of sense, I feel like, for the looks that I create. I really enjoy using that as an inner corner highlight, so this one's just honestly a really good favorite. The other palette that I used 7 times is the Viseart Kashmiri palette. This one is just really pretty for every day. I don't think it's like my favorite for like on the weekends or filming, but that's not what I'm doing most of the time. So I love this one because I do work an office job 9 to 5, 40 hours a week. So, you know, I do tend to reach for more like neutral, everyday sorts of shades. These shimmers are kind of more like, they're just like shimmery, but they're not glittery. So I really prefer that. I actually really love this purple shade here, but I really like this one for work especially. So I think it makes sense that I'd use this one a little bit more. So I have used this one 7 times, and I think it's really good. I actually have been really enjoying that one, and I do need to use that one more. Okay, so spot number 2, I've used this one 9 times. This is the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural palette. This is one of the newer ones to my collection as well, and this is the 3rd palette that I have on my eyes today. So I used just a couple of the more like warm tone matte shades in the crease, but I really love this one. Now, this is a neutral palette or a natural palette, but the shimmers are very, very, very shimmery. So this is not one that I actually tend to wear too much during the week. If I do, I'm only reaching into one shimmer shade, but this is one that when I want like a neutral but really glam look, this is what I'm reaching into. And I do really love how versatile this one is, because I can still make it work for the office, but I really love this one for filming or for on the weekends. So love that one. I'm really surprised by number 1 because I reached for this palette 10 times more than any of my other palettes. And the reason I did is because I felt like I wasn't using it enough. But this is the Persona Identity 1 palette. So I'm just really surprised that this one is the top ranking palette so far this year, because it doesn't, like, if I were to tell you my favorite palette, it would not be this one. I'm just being honest. But I did use it 10 times. A lot of that was dipping into this shade here called Sassy, and then also a lot of Humble. When I was reaching into a palette that didn't have those types of shades, I was dipping into this one. And like I said, I've been trying to count that more, but I also did use this for looks on their own as well. So I dipped into this for full looks as well. I really love these 4 shimmer shades here, and you know, I did actually use this more than any of my other palettes. So I'm very surprised that this one was my most used palette in the first quarter, but I really think that moving forward throughout the rest of the year, it's going to be interesting to see how this ranking changes each quarter based on the weather outside and kind of like what my favorite makeup style is at that moment. But I'm also excited to see kind of overall the whole year what ends up being number 1, because if the Persona Identity palette outranks my other palettes, I will just be so surprised. So that is it for this ranking video. I hope that you guys enjoyed. I will definitely be sure to keep you guys posted in the end of quarter 2 so that we can see which ones I use the most in the next quarter. So I'm really excited for that. But thank you guys so much for watching today's video. If you did enjoy it, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.